Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to At Mario Boom TV. I have my very special guest with me, Mr. Duane Lassiter, attorney at law, very competent, capable, and famed attorney based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Wayne, welcome to At Mario Boom TV.
Thank you, Mr. Boom. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's just jump right into this thing, Wayne. We're talking about this eviction crisis that is looming. Before I jump into that, I do want to give just some brief background about you.
Sure. I've been practicing for about 20 years now. I went to school in New York University, undergrad in Morehouse College, and our primary practice area is civil litigation.
All right, so Wayne, we're talking about, we're in the midst of a crisis that is developing in this country. The eviction moratorium has expired.
Yes.
Many people, thousands of people around the nation have not been able to pay rent because we're in the middle of a COVID pandemic. And as you know, unemployment has skyrocketed. People are not working because everything has been closed.
Okay.
That moratorium has ended and landlords are knocking on doors and they're telling people, pay up or get out. Tell us some of the basic rights for people at home, for renters. If the landlord shows up today and says, you owe 2 months back rent, I don't care about COVID, the moratorium is over, get out. What do you do?
Firstly, in pretty much every jurisdiction in the U.S., you cannot be evicted from an apartment where you have been living typically over 30 days. So that would, include most folks, whether your lease is still active. If you've been living there for 30 days, your landlord always has to go through the court system to evict you properly. So if your landlord were to show up on your door, knock and say, hey, I want you out of here, I'm changing the locks. The first thing I would do is I definitely would not leave. And as a short order, I would call the police. Because when the police get involved, they will show up and the landlord may say, hey, this guy hasn't paid rent in 3 months. I want him out of here. I own the property. And the police are generally instructed in those instances to tell the landlord, I feel your pain, but you have to go through the court system.
Right. And aside from that, typically there is a court order that has to be issued by a judge.
Correct.
That says you have to vacate the property. Is that how it would typically work?
That is. So typically what happens, the proper procedure for a landlord to follow is for that landlord to go down to, it's generally the small claims court, or sometimes it's a specific landlord-tenant court, but it's usually a part of the small claims court. So the landlord's required to go there, file a complaint, stating that you have not paid rent for a certain amount of time, late fees, if your lease is expired, sometimes that's listed as a reason for you to be out of the property. Then the court, that paperwork has to be served on you. So someone has to hand it to you physically. Most states also have a provision where if you're trying to avoid the paperwork being handed to you physically, it can be served through another means, like a certified service or something.
Or notice in the paper or something like that.
Something like that. So, and the purpose of that is for you to have a court, for there to be a hearing, because you may show up at a hearing, the landlord has one side, but there could be another side of the events. Mm-hmm. So you would be entitled to a hearing in front of a judge or some kind of hearing officer. And there would be a decision handed down. That decision may be, hey, you owe $2,000 in rent and you have to move out. You typically get a right of appeal even from that decision. And then it goes to, another level. And that next level is typically the final process. And then once it gets to the final process, that's when the sheriffs come and, board up your property and so forth and so on.
Gotcha. Okay. So what's something else that's important? I guess in a situation like that, do you recommend, in addition to calling the cops, maybe the next day when things are settled and you're still in your home or your apartment, should they then reach out for legal advice? Should they do they have the right to call a lawyer?
They definitely have the right to call a lawyer. So depending on what their financial situation is like, You can find lawyers in most cities that they might charge less than you would anticipate. Like, so for instance, I know some lawyers, they may charge you $500 or so, but that varies. But if you're unable to pay, if you're unable to pay money, you would want to call your legal aid, your local legal aid association, because then they can kind of walk you through the process, vet you, and see if you're entitled to legal counsel through their organization.
Yeah, and I guess the bottom line there is there are resources for people. The landlord shows up to evict you. You're not in the battle alone. There are organizations that are specifically set up for the purpose of helping people like that.
Correct, and that's a great point you bring up. I would also tell individuals to just do a simple Google search, because there are all kinds of organizations, local, statewide, that are around to help tenants, to let tenants know what their specific rights are, that you can kind of just reach out and have a telephone call with. And they would tell you probably a lot of the things that I'm telling you, but they may have, some other things that are more specific to your jurisdiction, which could be helpful.
Okay. All right. So that's one important right, if you will. Is there anything else that will be like right up there with that one that people just need to know that you would suggest they follow in the event they find themselves facing eviction as this moratorium comes to an end?
So another thing I would say is just really pay attention. If you find yourself in this predicament, pay attention to your mail, pay attention to notices on your door, because again, in most instances, whether you seek out help or not, there are notice provisions that are in effect. So there are going to be notices, and you don't want those notices to get by you. So you don't want to, go and bury your head in the sand. You're getting these notices, your landlord shows up at court, and the next thing you know, you're getting a notice on the door that says the sheriff will be there in 10 days. So I tell people to be aware and monitor their mail, in their door, their mailboxes, monitor all that information. And talk to your landlord if it's not, if the situation is not too contentious.
That's an important point, because procedurally, some of those notices by law have to be sent out. And if there's a missing link in how the notices are given, does that invalidate the eviction?
That's correct. So to give you an example, I'm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So, when you're down at landlord-tenant court, you'll see it all the time. A landlord will have a valid claim against someone for rent they owe, but they haven't notified the person that they have a pending matter in landlord-tenant court. So the court will routinely dismiss those cases, at which time the landlord has to go and refile it and start the process all over again.
Okay. All right. I think we've hit all some of the main points for people. I think the most important thing is, just because they say you're evicted doesn't mean it's true. There is a process, and there's a legal process that has to be followed. Have I missed anything? Is there anything else that you can think of that people just simply need to know is their right based on the law that they need to be aware of when they get themselves or find themselves in a situation like this?
I think you nailed it all. I would just add, just remember, I know many people know they owe the rent. They may not be able to pay it, but just remember that the court system is set up to recognize that there are two sides to every dispute. And you could very well get to court and you don't have a valid defense, but there are two sides to every dispute. So just remember, you have a right to a day in court. Okay. So just keep that in mind and reach out and get yourself some help.
Perfect. Mr. Lassiter, we want to thank you. Now, you just told us you've been practicing for quite some time in Philly.
Yes.
Tell people the name of your firm, how they can get in contact with you. Give us all the basics.
Sure. The name of the firm is Lassiter and Associates. The website is dlllaw.com. Our telephone number is 215-923-8833. And That's the easiest way to get us. I mean, we're available 24/7. So,
Okay.
if you have questions, just reach out.
DLLlaw.com.
Correct. 3 L's.
All right, give me that phone number again one more time.
Sure. That phone number is 215-923-8833.
Okay, folks. Duane Lassiter, Lassiter and Associates there in Philly for all of your legal needs. You got caught with a pound of cocaine in the car, you have a severed arm in the trunk and get pulled over, whatever you need. Wayne Lassiter. Wayne Lassiter is your lawyer. Wayne, thank you. I really think this is going to help a lot of people because, you know, there are some people right now, mothers, single moms with kids at home, who are terrified to go open that mailbox up because they know that the landlord is coming for them. And it's not that they don't want to pay the rent, they can't. You know, we're in the middle of a pandemic and they didn't ask for this. You know what I mean? They just want Congress to do their job and extend the moratorium, give them the unemployment that they need until we can get through this thing.
Right.
You know?
Right. And you know what, Mario, if I could add, the one thing I would add is if you're not in a situation with your landlord where it's you guys are at odds, I would also recommend to people, as daunting as it seems, reach out to the landlord because, again, a lot of people are in this situation. So it takes time to get you evicted, and it takes time for him to find a new tenant. And, you know, with what we're going on, with what's going on right now, it may not be the easiest thing to find a tenant. So he may be willing to take, you know, what you might consider a reasonable amount that you can handle if you do some kind of payment arrangement.
Right.
So
yeah.
That's also an option. But
yeah, because I think if you're living in an apartment where it's like a, you know, one person owns it, one of those like mom and pop type things. I mean, these are people too, and I think these people understand. I hope they do understand what we're going through, and you might be surprised they might be willing to work with you. You know what I mean?
That's correct.
You know, so I mean, I get what you're saying. I do think it's helpful and important to reach out to them and try to work things out from that vantage point, but also in the back of your mind, know, okay, if this doesn't work, these are my rights, and I have a right to this process. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Okay, Wayne Lassiter, thanks again, Wayne. We appreciate it, man.
No problem. It's been a pleasure.